Hi folks, Trisha Curtis, CEO of Petronas and host of the Petronas podcast. Major news week for oil and for the Fed and for inflation and the consumer this week. So we're seeing oil prices right now at $78 a barrel. That's a material move of several dollars this week. A lot of that has to do with rates and the 10-year yield curve and a lot of repricing of that and volatility within the 10-year yield curve because the Federal Reserve chose the speech on Wednesday was a really big deal. The Federal Reserve chose to keep rates unchanged. The stock market was getting nervous that there was potentially a hike in there. Jerome Powell is a dove. The Federal Reserve tends to be, it's loaded with doves. No one in the right mind thought that they were actually going to raise rates, but they essentially took the rate raise off the table, although I don't think they completely did. And I talk about this in depth within episode 107 of the Petronas podcast, which is going to drop shortly. I don't actually think they completely did. I think the war against inflation is absolutely not won. You hear that in earnings calls from Starbucks to McDonald's, that the consumer is absolutely being tapped out by inflation, and they're seeing decline in sales in the stores. You see the same thing of decline in sales in China. Now that's because the Chinese economy is poor, but also because they're pushing against foreign brands like U.S. brands. So all those are really big deals, and that's a really big deal when we start thinking about oil prices and concerns about oil demand. And lastly, I just want to say, I don't think, so the Federal Reserve has not won the war on inflation. Inflation is a really big deal. Sticky inflation is going to be a problem, and this has to be addressed. But, leave it to the Biden administration to continue to go after domestic oil and gas when this is the one bright spot in the U.S. economy, which is adding jobs, which is really supporting the U.S. economy and certainly supporting, the bills going in and out because we're keeping a lot of this money at home now. And we're a net exporter. But the Biden administration, the FTC essentially approved the Exxon Pioneer merger, but said Scott Sheffield, the CEO of Pioneer, could not be on the Exxon board and is alluding that or saying he colluded with OPEC. Now, when we're talking about collusion, guys, maybe the Biden administration should be looking at solar and China. I can't imagine that there's not collusion in that sector or many, many sectors within the Chinese government and the U.S. government. So, folks, with that, I hope you have a wonderful weekend. Take a listen to episode 107 of the Petronas podcast and 106, 108, which Sam Shiverick will drop next or in a couple weeks. Bye, folks.